Welcome back to Music for the Future. Over the past 6 classes, we've finished listening to the Opus 18 quartets, Beethoven's first foray into the world of string quartets, a mammoth undertaking, an endeavor which he took very seriously as we've explored this tremendous compendium of work. Beethoven did not return to the string quartet in any kind of focused way for about 6 years. And they were 6 years of massive upheaval in Europe in general, as well as in his personal life and his artistic life. It's hard to overstate the degree to which Beethoven's approach to music and life was altered during this time. And by the time we get to his next set of quartets, the 3 quartets that make us Opus 59, the music sounds like it's coming from a whole new world. The next set of quartets, again, is Opus 59. That is to say, he wrote and published 41 other pieces between the quartets we've heard so far, Opus 18, and the ones we're going to be hearing today, Opus 59. And some of those pieces were massive and important. So we're going to take a few minutes to catch up with what Beethoven's been up to and why the music has changed so much before we dive into the first of these 3 quartets. Which brings us to our first segment of the day, what is going on with Beethoven? So what changed for Beethoven between the Opus 18 quartets and the Opus 59 quartets? He's becoming more aware of his powers as an artist, and his apprenticeship period is over. That doesn't mean that he felt like he knew everything about music. In fact, we see him trying new ideas over and over in these pieces and others around the time. But he's wielding his power with more confidence and purpose and direction, especially the way he's writing counterpoint with multiple melodies working at the same time. We'll see that over and over as we look at these pieces. But Beethoven's view as an artist is also changing because of his personal life, which was a little bit mismanaged. Beethoven is still imagining having this devoted wife, but he's really only interested in women that he feels are at the same level in society as him. And remember, he considers himself an important artist and an important voice for the world. But as a freelance artist without a clear source of income, he's not really considered a good match for anyone wealthy and influential. So none of these relationships ever really materialize, and he starts feeling isolated and lonely. There's another source for anxiety and loneliness at this time, and that's his slowly dawning realization that his hearing problems are not disappearing, but getting worse. His problems at this point are a little erratic. He's missing little bits of conversation. He's starting to have trouble hearing the high notes, and he's becoming very sensitive to sudden changes in volume. And by the time he really notices this, the course has already been set in motion. Total deafness is still a little ways off, but Beethoven sees the writing on the wall, and he's begging his doctor friends for treatment. But nothing is really a permanent help. In fact, some of the stuff he's trying is probably doing more damage than good. So Beethoven goes through a very dark period at this time, and around 1802, he's even considering taking his own life. But he gets out of this darkness with an iron will to fulfill his purpose on earth as an artist. And that changes his writing. Suddenly, every piece has very individual characteristics. He's trying new things as if each piece could be his last. He's expanding the scope of what he writes, and he's writing music that's a lot more heroic in character. He also stops writing for amateurs altogether and starts writing music that totally ignores difficulties and technical limitations. He only cares about expressing the idea he has. And the players notice this. When Beethoven gives his friend the violin part for the Opus 59 string quartets, his friend says they're not playable. And Beethoven says to the friend, "When the muse is speaking with me, do you think I give a damn about your miserable violin?" It's a whole new attitude. This is music for the future. So among the pieces that Beethoven finishes between the Opus 18s and the Opus 59 quartets, I want to show you just a couple that kind of encapsulate this new heroic energy. And the first is his third symphony, which he even calls the Heroic Symphony, Eroica. It's built on a huge scale. It's the biggest symphony ever written in history up to this point. The first movement alone is as long as a whole Haydn symphony. And it seems like he's striking a hammer from the very first notes. Let's hear a little bit of the third symphony. It's great music, but there's more to it than just that hammering. It's the way the theme starts in the cello down low and starts bubbling up like he's summoning his power. He makes the harmony unstable almost right away so that we as listeners don't know where we are, as if we're starting on a journey of the unexpected. Let's hear that again. And symphonies aren't the only thing on Beethoven's mind during this time. We know Beethoven was a pianist, and he brought this heroic vision into his sonatas for solo piano as well. These massive, long, extremely difficult pieces that pianists still struggle to play today. They're remarkable. They're breaking new ground all the time in terms of form, in terms of what happens when, and the harmonies and the development of the themes. Let's hear the opening of his sonata in C major, the Waldstein Sonata. This piece also strikes a heroic tone, and it also bubbles up from the depths, just like the Third Symphony. And it also feels like we're on shifting ground harmonically to give the impression that we're embarking on a heroic journey. So what causes Beethoven to return to string quartets after such a long break? We get the impression he's been waiting for the opportunity to do something interesting with his next set of quartets. And he's given that opportunity when a Russian art supporter, this guy by the name of Razumovsky, commissions him for a set of 3 string quartets. Writing 3 quartets is obviously a little more manageable than writing 6, and with Beethoven's new confidence, he finishes these 3 pieces in 6 months, instead of the 2 years he took to write Opus 18. And this new set, his Opus 59, is known by that patron's name. They're called the Razumovsky Quartets. But there's another reason Beethoven wants to start writing chamber music again. His friend is starting a new concert series built around chamber music, and that's a new idea. This is one of the first times there's going to be a paying audience to see chamber music played by professionals. And this means Beethoven doesn't have to hold back in what he's writing, because they're going to be performed by real virtuosos. And in these new works for a big audience, Beethoven's interested in power. He wants to see if he can make as big a sound as possible. And he tries all sorts of techniques for getting a powerful sound that we'll see as we start to explore these quartets. Just like the Eroica Symphony that we heard and the Waldstein Sonata that we heard in the last video, the first quartet of Opus 59, Opus 59 number 1, opens with a tune bubbling up from the depths. And in a string quartet, that means the cello gets to play the main tune, which is a pretty unusual way to start a string quartet. And the effect is similar to that in the symphony, this long line unfolding from the deep, like there's music coming up from the ground. And then this tune that comes up so low in the cello is answered by a violin, but playing really high. So we have the very low and the very high, as if Beethoven's defining the space he wants to use in the whole quartet right at the beginning, showing us the whole range. Let's hear that again. There's a sense of big space and span in this music. It's like a wide horizon. We can feel it just in the theme itself, which feels like it's opening a big wide space. Let's take a look at that theme. The way it begins with these 4 notes that go up gives us a sense that we're reaching upwards, and the whole theme sort of feels like it's reaching up the whole time. Then we go up again. But it's also the way the tune is treated in this movement and the length of the movement overall. This is the longest movement of a string quartet that Beethoven's written yet. Let's listen to the whole exposition. Remember, the exposition is the first part of a sonata form, so we'll hear the first theme, the second theme, and some closing out music. So see if you can follow the form while also taking in the sense of wide open space that Beethoven is creating in this music. There's a lot to take in this exposition. Here's a case where I feel like we could really use a repeat of the whole exposition, which we talked about was the convention of the time. But Beethoven upends our expectations. He has too much to say in this movement to waste time repeating what he's already said. But to add to our confusion, he gives us a fake out. He starts the next section, the development, as if he's repeating the exposition, but then immediately pulls out the rug from under us by sending the music super far afield. Let's hear the opening of that development section. Beethoven's packing a ton of stuff into this first movement, which is huge, even without the exposition repeat. And one cool thing is how he keeps a tight control over his musical motives. A musical motive is a recognizable little slice of music, maybe even just a few notes. The most famous motive in all of Beethoven's music is probably this. Just 4 notes, but so recognizable. Musical motives are short, and they leave a lot of room for development. You can do a lot of things with them musically. And sometimes a motive is just a little slice of the main theme, like here. That's just 5 notes, but we can recognize it. And when you listen to the whole first movement of this quartet, you'll hear Beethoven playing around a lot with that musical motive. But for now, let's go to the second movement where Beethoven gets even more obsessed with motive. The second movement of Opus 59, number 1, has been described as a vision of dry bones. And I think it's because of the way it opens. This would have been music that would have really surprised both the players and the audience. Let's hear it. What do you notice in the music? First of all, it starts with just the cello playing completely alone. That's weird on its own, but what's even weirder is that the cellist just plays one note over and over. So what we get is really just the rhythm. There's no melody, there's no harmony, it's just pure rhythm on one note. That sounds cool to us, but it would have been totally bewildering to the audience at the time. No one had ever written anything like that before. And that rhythm is answered in that question and answer form by just the second violin playing alone. Another pretty bizarre choice. Let's hear that music again. The amazing thing for me about this movement is its obsession with this rhythm. movement takes this really simple thing, this cello rhythm, on a huge journey with a bewildering diversity of ideas about what you can do with that rhythm. And this rhythm is almost never absent from the musical texture. Let's listen to a little bit more of this movement and keep your ear out for that rhythm. Now Beethoven plays the same trick on us that he did in the first movement. We would expect that the first section of a scherzo like this would be repeated, and he starts as if it will be. We get the solo cello on that same note again, answered by the violin again. But once again, he takes us to a totally different place almost immediately, keeping the obsession with that rhythm, but getting almost out of control. Now, in a scherzo movement like this, a fast dance in 3, we would expect to get that middle section, the trio, that's contrasting. And Beethoven gives it to us, and there's a level of connection here with the first movement. Remember that theme from the first movement, that rising 4-note motive? Beethoven copies that rising 4-note motive for the trio theme here. He's just changing the rhythm a little bit. And in fact, what feels like the trio section turns out to be the second theme. And Beethoven's giving us a scherzo in sonata form. It's some amazing sleight of hand. And we may not hear it that way right away, but he leads us into a development section. Let's hear a little bit of the development section of this scherzo. The third movement of this quartet is huge. It's almost 15 minutes long, and it's set in minor, which is a little bit of a rare thing for Beethoven to do. Let's review what minor is. Remember, the standard scale in classical music is usually the major scale. But if we change a couple of the notes in the scale, it gives a different feeling, a sense of sadness, melancholy, yearning, or tragedy. Beethoven often uses minor for stormy, fast music, but less often for slow music. The last time Beethoven wrote a big, slow movement in minor in a string quartet was all the way back in Opus 18, number 1. That movement was about Romeo and Juliet, you'll remember. And here again, Beethoven has an image in his mind. For this movement, the image is a weeping willow over my brother's grave. We don't know exactly why he chose this image. Like a lot of families in the late 1700s, the Beethoven family did lose some children in infancy. It's a pretty common tragedy during this time. And Beethoven also had a tempestuous relationship with his living brothers. So when Beethoven talks about an image of a weeping willow over my brother's grave, it could be some kind of comment on his family dynamics, but it could also be a reference to something we don't know about, like a work of literature. Or it could just be a poetic image that he thought could fit the music well. We don't really know for sure, which means that we get to decide for ourselves as we listen. Let's hear the opening of this movement and listen for that image. What do you think? Does this music do a good job of portraying that poetic image? A weeping willow over a grave, and even more than that, over a brother's grave. You might think about what you would do if you were writing music to show that image. Now we hear the exact same thing again, but this time played by the cello, giving it an even darker and more despondent feeling. This movement goes through many, many different landscapes, and I'll leave you to explore it when you listen to the whole quartet. And this movement is also in sonata form. So by now we've had 3 tremendously big movements, all 3 of them in sonata form, chock full of ideas and constantly breaking new ground. So by the time we get to the finale, it's almost like, what else can Beethoven say? We need something to break the tension. And Beethoven does this in a kind of remarkable way, starting with how he gets into the finale. Let's take a second to explore that. He ends the 3rd movement, the slow movement, with this incredibly ornate violin solo, which ends on a trill, going back and forth between 2 notes as fast as possible. And this gives a feeling of excitement and energy and anticipation. And the trill doesn't stop. In fact, the music doesn't stop. It goes straight from the 3rd movement into the last movement, so that the experience becomes totally seamless. Let's hear that ornate violin solo that ends the 3rd movement and the trill that leads straight into the start of the finale. So when the finale finally starts, Beethoven gives us a great tune that definitely breaks the tension. But why does that theme feel somehow familiar? Well, just like in the 2nd movement, Beethoven here is reaching all the way back to the very opening of the piece. You remember that. And here in the finale, it starts just the same way, with the cello rising from the depths, just like in the 1st movement. And it's answered by the violin, just like in the 1st movement. That's the same relationship, but there's more than that. This theme that starts the finale has that same shape of rising up, and it even includes that same 4-note motive. That's a pretty subtle thing for Beethoven to do, but it helps us subconsciously feel like the whole piece is tied together. It has an inner coherence, and that's something Beethoven's going to be obsessed with for the rest of his career. Let's hear those 2 side by side, the opening of the 1st movement and then the opening of the finale. You can hear some of the characteristics they share in common, the rising up from the cello, the same sort of shapes. There's one more special thing about this opening tune that I want to show you. This is actually not a tune that Beethoven wrote himself. That's rare in any Beethoven piece, but especially in one that he's obviously put so much care and thought into. So who wrote this tune and why did he include it? Well, in this movement, Beethoven is paying homage to the person that's paying for the creation of these works, that Russian art supporter, Razumovsky. So he decides to use a Russian folk tune as the main theme of the last movement, but he does something a little unexpected with it. We know that Beethoven had a book of Russian folk tunes, and we can even find the one he uses for this movement. And it's a slow song, a sad song, a song about a soldier returning from war. And it probably would have sounded like this in the book that Beethoven had. It's a sad, slow song in minor. but Beethoven wants to play it fast, play it light, and he puts it in major. Let's hear what Beethoven does with that tune. Why would he have done this? We're not totally sure. Beethoven didn't speak Russian, so it's possible that he just didn't understand the words of the original song. But I think he would have figured it out from the context. I think it's more likely that he's trying again to completely defy expectations by saying to Razumovsky, hey, you might know this tune, but you don't know it like this. I think he was genuinely trying to bring a smile of surprise to Razumovsky's face. In any case, the result is a movement that's lighter and gives a bit of relief after those three gigantic movements that have come before. And there's one more thing about this last movement. Just like the first three, this last movement is in sonata form. If there's any quartet that comes before this in which all four movements are in sonata form, I don't know of it. It's almost like Beethoven is saying, could I do it? Could I write a quartet that's four sonata forms in a row? And he does. Let's hear the whole exposition so that we get familiar with the themes of this finale, so that we'll be prepared when he starts playing those crazy games with them in the development. Now that you've heard a little bit of each of the four movements of this quartet, you're ready to hear the entire thing. You'll want to buckle in because this is a giant piece, a real hero's journey. I'll see you in the next video for the performance of Opus 59, number 1.